I'm Frederica, or Fred, as you hear. Frederica Hamilton. This is actually my church, and just my background. I've been 35 years in the NHS. I've been a nurse, a midwife, a health visitor. I've worked all through that. And I've been working with Pilgrim's Friend Society for the last couple of years now. I work as an operations manager, and I also lead on our strategy for developing care, Christian care, and our dementia care. And that's really, really important to us, that we care well for people in their later years. I also come with personal experience as a daughter-in-law of Leonie. She died about 3 years ago now. She had dementia. We were with her on that journey. It was very intense. So some of those feelings you have and you're sharing with one another, that I've been there, and I know of how some of that can be very, very hard. So I come from a professional point of view, but also from a personal point of view. And we're going to watch a little clip now. And thank you, John, for enabling us.
I looked in the mirror, and what did I see but a little old lady peering back at me, with bags and sags and wrinkles and wispy white hair. And I asked my reflection, "How did you get there? You once were straight and vigorous, and now you're stooped and weak, when I tried so hard to keep you from becoming an antique." My reflection's eyes twinkled, and she solemnly replied, "You're looking at the gift wrap, and not the jewel inside, a living gem and precious, of unimagined worth, unique and true, the real you, the only you on earth. The years that spoil your gift wrap with other things more cruel should purify and strengthen and polish up that jewel. So focus your attention on the inside, not the out, on being kinder, wiser, more content, and more devout. Then, when your gift wrap's stripped away, your jewel will be set free to radiate God's glory throughout eternity."
It's a lovely little clip, isn't it? And I think it's just so speaks about how do we see old people. When we see an old person, do we really try and see who they are and see the inside and know them, or do we just look on the outside and see a wrinkly old, sometimes smelly, sometimes dirty old person? That's reality for old, like when we see homeless people, what do we see? Do we see the person? I love this quote. I've learned that people will forget what you said, they forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. I think it's really, really powerful quote. And when you think about it, think of a teacher who made you feel either $1 million or really terrible. I always go back right to my early teenagehood of my PE teacher, who was horrible to me because I was so unsporty, and she let me know in no uncertain terms. But I've never forgotten her. I can't remember exactly her words. And I think it's true for all of us, but even more so, people living with dementia, their feelings are what remains. So how they feel about you, and even on that first occasion you meet them. And my mother-in-law, she had, in her home was a carer called Fiona, and there was something had gone wrong with Fiona right in the beginning of her stay. Because whenever Fiona came in the room, Mum would go, "Oh." I said, "Mum, she's such a nice person." And she actually was, she was so nice, but something had gone wrong. We never knew what it was, but she just didn't like Fiona. And because she had dementia, she couldn't say, "I don't like the way she speaks to me," or "I don't like this or that." She just didn't like her, and she always made her know that. But the other thing also is that, so I'm, as part of my role, I'm currently based at our Chippenham home. It's called Middlefields House, and I was there a couple of years when I started with the society. And there's a gentleman who I'd seen quite a bit. And when I came back to Middlefield 6 months, I said, "Hello, Paul." And he had no idea who I was, but he knew we got on really well. He said, "I know you." And I thought, yeah, we know each other. It's because we had that lovely feeling for one another. So feelings really matter, and matter so much for people living with dementia. Now, dementia is an umbrella term. There's over 200 dementias. 1 in 10 people will have more than one type of dementia. I think we're not going to go into the medical details too much of it because there's a lot of research done all the time as well. And I think we're particularly good in younger onset dementia to identify much more sort of detailed, which one is it, like on the side where it says other dementias. Most of our older people will have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or Lewy body vascular dementia or frontotemporal, and often Alzheimer's disease and vascular dementia. That's a very common combination we see. But also, we know in our care home population so not our, but across the country, the whole care home population, about 70% of people who live in care homes who don't have a diagnosis have got some form of dementia. So it is really very prevalent. You also have dementia with people who have Parkinson's. That is often part of that as well. But people who've had a stroke or any brain injury can show signs like somebody who's got a dementia diagnosis. So that's just how the brain is affected. So again, for this sort of stuff we're talking about today is also helpful for anybody who has got a brain injury, So there's different patterns of impairment. It's not just the memory. And in 2021, 944,000 people in the UK lived with dementia. In 2050, the estimate is that it is going to be 1.6 million. 1 in 2 of us, so half the population, will be affected by dementia. That is either because we've got it or because we know someone close to us who has got dementia. So it is, even 1.6 million doesn't seem a lot, but it is still going to affect everybody somewhere. It's a disease of the brain. It's a neurodegenerative disease, and it's got widespread consequences, social, psychological, and spiritual, and relational. That's where we often see those effects as well. Now, if you are squeamish, do shut your eyes after you looked at this briefly. Otherwise, I won't keep it up for too long. I think this is a really important slide for us to understand dementia better, because we so often think it's the memory and the memory goes, but it affects the whole brain. Now, these two brains, you see, the one on the left and the one on the right, are matched for the greatest similarities. So those of you who work in medicine, you'll know that when they're matched, they're trying to cut out all those factors which could cause a difference. So they would have, say this is a 70-year-old man. I'm making this up, I have no idea. But say it's a 70-year-old man, they will both be of the same ethnic background, they'll be the same height, the same weight, they'll be non-smokers. So all those things are not going to affect how the brain is. The only difference is the person on the right has had Alzheimer's disease. And you can see how the brain looks more unhealthy, there are bigger gaps in the brain, and you see that also particularly in the crosscut. So it's not just a memory problem, it affects absolutely our everything, and as we go through you will see a little bit more of that. So some ways how these brain changes affect people with dementia. People struggle to learn new, and you may notice that if you're living with someone with dementia or know someone with dementia, that's often the first things where you think, why don't they? It's so obvious they need to do. They struggle to learn new. And with my mother-in-law, she moved from her house into a flat before she moved into the care home. And because of her, actually, dementia affects the eyesight as well. She actually, by that stage, was registered partially blind and couldn't see terribly well. So I thought, I helped her move, the family helped her move. I thought it'd be much easier for her to have a 360 kettle, because that's much safer. Then she had one of these old ones, you have to really make sure it fits. You know, the ones which I don't like. Anyway, so I thought, she had a 360 kettle in her cupboard. Next time I came to visit, she had her old kettle, and I said, Mum, she just couldn't, even on the kettle. I mean, it seems such a simple thing, doesn't it? It seems so obvious. Yeah, it's much safer, you can't see. She just couldn't learn new. And that is, again, also, if people need a new tablet, why do I need that for? I'm only taking 5 tablets, I don't need 6. You're giving me something I don't need. Or needing a walker. often needing a walker comes slightly later on, but already in the early stages, people struggle to learn new. So when it comes to the mid stages and you now need a walker, it's not that you just forget, you just can't make that connection of that's what you need. It affects our prefrontal cortex and the executive control center. I'm going to get onto that in a minute because I've got a whole slide on that. But also visual changes, and these are really, really important to understand for all of us, absolutely anybody, because they should inform how we interact with people, how we approach people. So the visual changes early in dementia, if you... I would normally get in my training, I always get people up and stretch out and put their arms to the side. This is our safety side here. And as we get older, this reduces. That's why we always have to do the eye test for our driving, don't we? Because we may not see people coming in from the side. Now that really reduces. And what is left in dementia is the field of curiosity, which is sort of just about like that, 1 meter, 2 feet around. But in the day-to-day, it affects us early in dementia like a scuba diving goggle. So if you just put your hands together flat on the top and just put your hands underneath, don't be embarrassed because your neighbor now can't see you. It's only me who can see you. And just see how much it cuts out, just your peripheral vision already. This is early on in dementia. Okay, so this is probably at a stage when nobody knows yet that you have dementia. So now I know Jenny actually, so I feel comfortable approaching her. Jenny, just put your goggles on. And just look straight forward. So if I come from the side, Jenny will have no idea that I'm coming. And that can be really quite frightening for someone with dementia. As the disease progresses, that gets to binoculars, and later on in the disease, monoculars. And we do see, people who have such restricted vision are not all in care homes. They may still live among us. So we really need to understand just that simple visual field. And we're going to look in the next session at language and our ability to understand and produce language. That is really, again, a very significant effect of dementia because it affects our interactions. Now, the Executive Control Center these are all the things which our Executive Control Center is at the front of our brains, and that's affected in all dementias. It's our ability to, our impulse control. So thinking back to Mum and Fiona, she was very cross with Fiona. She just, she couldn't stop her impulse. It may also be that there's just something I don't like people, whatever, sniffing next to me. And normally with my brain intact, I just think, I wish they'd stop sniffing. But actually, now my brain is not intact, I've got dementia, I may just say, stop it! And you think, God, that's really rude. This is in church, I'm sat next to you and say, stop, that's just so rude. What's the matter with her? I've got dementia. I can't stop my impulse control. Okay. Being logical. It's cold. I need to put a coat on. No, I'm fine. Oh, it's very hot outside. Why are you going out with all those layers, Mum? It's hot. No, I'm fine. I need it. I can't make those connections anymore because that happens. And again, that's quite early on in dementia. The making choices. You're going to a restaurant and say, what do you want to eat? Well, I don't know. So you're reading out the menu. Words become meaningless. So give me a simple choice. Do you want this or that? Do you want fish or meat? Okay, meat. So that you can have this meat or that meat. Make it simple choices. So don't give me lots of different things you may want me to do. Oh, Mum, shall we go to the park or to the shops or shall we have a cup of tea? Hang on, too much. I can't do that. Okay, so that's quite important. The start sequence, complete, move on. Now, one of my favorite examples I always use with our carers, but it's important for everybody, is brushing teeth. So it's a start sequence, complete, move on event. It's anything we do in a certain sequence. So we take our toothbrush, we put the toothpaste on. If you're a dry brusher, you brush straight away. That's what we should be doing. Otherwise, you may rinse first, then brush. Then you spit out, you rinse your toothbrush, and you put it away. Now, you may find somebody who has dementia, they take the toothbrush and you just, because they may need a little bit of support, and put it away again. And they have no idea they missed out all the steps in between because they can't do that anymore. It could be things like when you do things, peeling sprouts together, for example. And you think, but it's something we all know. We've always done peel sprouts. You got the knife and the sprout. I don't know what to do. You show me, and then I can complete that. And in the church context, also in churches where you go to communion to the front, so the person will come but gets the bread and doesn't know what to do because they cannot complete that sequence of taking the bread. So it could have those very practical consequences. Self-awareness, how I look. So I may wear my shoes the wrong way round. I have no idea because actually of other systems affected. So nobody would normally walk with their shoes the wrong way around because you would notice immediately. But actually, because my brain is so impaired now, I didn't even notice I've put them on the wrong way around because my brain didn't register that feeling of it doesn't fit. And I'm also losing the self-awareness of how I look. So I may actually always wear the same sweater because that's my favorite sweater. I have that feeling. I like that sweater. I have no idea it's now dirty or it may even smell. I have no idea. So that leaves us. And seeing another point of view, that's an interesting one because it's that empathy. People living with dementia can appear quite selfish. And again, an example from Mum's care home, they were always sat in a group. The care home tried to make them sit in little groups to make friends, and the 6 ladies together. And we came and visited, and she wasn't sat with that. And she said, oh. There was a new lady they tried to integrate, so hence they moved the ladies around. But that was, from her point of view, it was very wrong because she should be sat with her friends. She couldn't see that someone else needed also integrating like she had been integrated. The other part of the brain, which we didn't go into, and I haven't got a slide for, but it's the limbic system, which is sort of trying to point inside my brain. It's part of the brain which is involved in our behavior and emotional responses. So that is sort of our hunger, thirst, our wake-sleep cycle, our elimination, basically toileting, is affected, comfort, personal preferences, pain perception. I may be in pain, but I can't say it. So I may show other behaviors, but I'm actually in pain, or I need the toilet, but I can't say that. So that is all those things are affected. It's not. I'm not forgetting to go to the toilet. I know I need it, but I can't tell you. I haven't got those words anymore.
So what I'm going to do just now in a few moments before we break is to talk a little bit about how our perspectives on people who live with dementia really matter. And I'm going to try and make some biblical references here as well, so to do this from a Christian perspective. And when I talk about perspectives, I mean how we think about dementia and how we think about living with people, about people living with dementia, how that then affects what we do, whether we realise it or not, and how we are when we live with people with dementia. My first point is that it's an us thing, okay? The dementia perspective that matters, it's not about me as an individual. And it's really important, I think, that we recognise that our culture, at this moment in time, encourages us to think about ourselves as individuals first. That's our culture in 2024 in the UK. Now, throughout history, and in many other cultures, that isn't the case. People think first of family, or they think of community, and then they think of individual. And it really matters when we think about dementia. In fact, the experts would say that the level of social connectedness, the usness around a person, is one of the key things that slows or hastens the onset of the disease. And let's just think a little bit about a biblical perspective, shall we, on this matter of us and me. Well, the Bible says that each of us were saved by an act of God's grace. So I was saved because God did something for me. But how does God work primarily in the world today? He works primarily through his church. That's an us thing. That's us together. He calls us to love others as ourselves. That's an us thing. We're told to fulfill the law of Christ, we need to be mutually dependent. I need to ask for help, and I need to offer help. You need to offer help, and you need to ask for help. That's an us thing. And of course, we're described, aren't we, as a body, an interconnected group of people. So I think the right way to understand God's design for people is as mutually dependent. And this really, really matters. I've already said, the level of social connectedness is probably the single most important thing that determines the rate of progression of the disease. But secondly, social connected can help somebody whose memory is failing or behaviour is changing to hold things together for longer. And we'll look at that a little bit more later. And you noticed in the prayer, there was a phrase in the prayer that others can be my memory. I don't know if you noticed that when we started. And then it's not just us relating with people with living with dementia, but also we need to think of people who are caring for those living with dementia. The common characteristic is that the person who's doing the caring gets consumed by the person they're caring for. They need to have circles of support around them, otherwise their world also narrows in. And whether those circles of support are practical, meals, or practical, a little break, or whether it's emotional support, someone to cry with, or it's spiritual support, someone to pray with, or someone to cry out to God with. It's so important that we have an us perspective on people living with and people who are caring for those who are living with dementia. Secondly, it's really, really important when we have a perspective on dementia that we don't only see what people cannot do. Double negative in there. We don't only see what people cannot do. And again, we need to recognise that we're up against it here in our culture in 2024. And if ever there was a good example of this, probably in the election campaign, what gets highlighted are the mistakes that people made or the deficiencies in somebody's position. And that's what our society encourages us to do. Well, God does the opposite, I think, doesn't he? Because his power is made perfect in what? In strength, in intellectual cleverness or might, in cognitive ability. No, the Bible tells us that God's power is made perfect in weakness. Now, the very best dementia care, and the people who understand this from a psychological and medical point of view, will highlight that alongside social connectedness, this deficit mindset is probably the next most dangerous thing that affects care. If you only can see what people cannot do, if you can only see what people cannot do, you don't try and encourage them to do something. You give up on them and they don't do it. They don't exercise and their decline hastens. And we need to remember that. And that's true in the practical way of living, but it's also really, really true in the spiritual side of things. It's also easy to assume that God's Spirit isn't at work in somebody's life just because we can't see outward manifestations that. We can stop praying with, we can stop sharing scripture with, we can stop singing hymns with people who have dementia because we're not seeing what's going on inside. We've got a deficit mindset. Just a little example of that. I used to visit David in a care home locally. David was living with dementia, and I would go in, I would sit with him. When we sat in the lounge together, there was a lady who always sat near the exit, and she was nearly always distressed. She didn't actually need any help, but she was just distressed, calling out for help. And I suppose to my shame slightly, I didn't very often stop and talk with her because my time was normally up as I was leaving. I would walk past her. But on this one particular day, I had with me a book, and it was one of those that was produced to commemorate Queen Elizabeth's, I forget what it was now, but her picture was on the front. And for some reason, that particular day, I stopped and sat by the lady And we opened the book together. And on the first page, there was this lady, all she had ever heard her do before was to cry out help. And so we opened the page, and for some reason I started to read the first page. And the first page was actually about the coronation of Queen Elizabeth's father. And there was a poem on that page. And as I started to read that poem, the lady joined in. She knew it, which surprised me. And the very last line, it was a prayer. It was a poem, but it was also a prayer. And it was talking about putting your hand in the hand of God. And as we read that bit, the lady reached out her hand and put it in mine. Now, we need to remember those little moments that remind us that in some way I'll never fully understand. I have no idea what was going on in the heart, the mind, the spirit of that lady. But we must try and remember those moments and try not to just think of this lady as somebody who all she can do is cry out help. There's something going on inside there, and we must try and avoid that deficit mindset. We're going to hear a little bit more, quite a bit more, from Dr. Jennifer Butte later on as we go in the seminar. We're going to hear some of her videos. Jennifer Butte is a medical doctor who's living with dementia. And she said this. She said, under 3 headings placed to this point, yesterday, and this is bad, she said, most people only remember how a person used to be in the past. That's the deficit mindset. This is better. Today, she said, this is good. Some people recognise the worth of the individual as they are today and treat them with respect and dignity. That's good. Then she had under the heading forever, and this is the better or the best. Christians, she said, should see people how the person will be welcomed into heaven and treat them accordingly. So that's the second aspect of, or the second perspective that I think is really important as we think about dementia. Thirdly, this is my final point, we just need to understand that God's perspective on people living with dementia is constant. It doesn't matter, it doesn't change whatever behaviours they exhibit or they don't exhibit, or whatever they remember or whatever they have forgotten. There's a well-known theologian, Professor John Swinton, and he said the following: if God knew us when we were still in the womb, as he does, quoting Psalm 139, and if God does have plans for us to prosper us, as he does, quoting Jeremiah 29, then neurological disease cannot separate us from the love of God and our ongoing vocation as human beings. Lives that are touched by profound forms of dementia have meaning and continued purpose. And going further, the Bible tells us that God saves, and he saves, doesn't he, irrespective of our mental capacity. God carries us, all of us actually, and sustains us irrespective of our mental capacity. And God's purpose is for mutuality, is for burden sharing, it's helping one another, irrespective of our mental capacity. And God remembers us even when we can no longer remember him. And he visits us with his salvation, no matter how much our brains might decay. Thinking back to the slide that Fred showed. So let's try and sum all of this up, shall we? God's perspectives on people living with dementia. Well, Fred described dementia, but there is no single dementia pathway. We're all different. Our brains are all different, and dementia as a disease affects us all differently. But there's some common themes. Things don't join up. Things slip away. Fogginess, problems with words and ideas, insecurity, lost confidence, confusion, frustration, anxiety, emotional turmoil, and that sometimes shows itself in behaviours that we find really difficult. There's a really good play. It's actually now available on video, actually. It's called The Father by Florian Ziller. I don't know if anybody's seen the film. I saw the play when it was in its relatively early days in this country anyway, in a little theatre in North London. And the play is trying to give you an understanding of what it's like living with dementia. And even though I knew that, I didn't quite get it, because at the half time, the interval, I thought I was wasting my time watching this play, because I could not make sense of what was going on. There were lots of relationships in the family, and sons and daughters and friends and whatever. And for a moment, you'd think, oh, that's it. And then something else would happen, and you'd realise you've got it wrong, and it's not like that at all. and things shifted in time. And it was only at half time, when I was talking with other people, that somebody gently pointed out to me that was the whole point of the play, because that's the experience of somebody living with dementia, particularly the early stages. Moments where it all comes together, and then it changes and it slips, and it's not right anymore. That immense frustration. I thought I was just wasting my time. I'm not living with it day in, day out. So I'd recommend that book to sum up that play, or film as it now is. But let's remember some other things from this session. But God remains, God remembers, God saves, God carries, God works in ways that we might not fathom, we can't fathom, but we do know that he works through weakness, and he doesn't work through strength. He values dependency, and he works his purposes out through Christian people, his church, me and you, the body of Christ.